Hello, everyone. Try again. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be with you here today to talk about, I'm Tom Hicks, a commissioner at the Election Assistance Commission. I'm pleased to be with you here today to talk about the important topic of accessibility in elections. According to census data, people with disabilities account for approximately 1/6 of all eligible voters in the 2016 elections, totaling 36 million people. In the 2018 midterms, people with disabilities voted at a rate that was 5% lower than the national average than those without disabilities. At the state level, this turnout gap was as high as 20%. Reducing the turnout gap, complying with federal disability voting right laws, and effectively serving voters with disabilities in the ongoing challenge for election officials in many jurisdictions. Additionally, there are nearly 26 million people in the U.S. with limited English proficiency and roughly 67 million people who speak a language other than English at home. 263 local election jurisdictions across the country are currently required under the Voting Rights Act to provide language assistance to their voters, and many other jurisdictions provide such assistance voluntarily. A vital part of the EAC's mission and the work the election officials do is to support voters and their accessibility needs. For the first time in federal law, the Help America Vote Act of 2002 afforded voters with disabilities the right to cast their ballots privately and independently in a manner that provides the same opportunity for accessibility and participation as for other voters. HAVA requires that election jurisdictions use voting systems in all polling places that ensures such access. In the early years of the EAC, the agency distributed HAVA funds to the states to help election offices purchase voting equipment that meets this mandate and support additional efforts to strengthen the accessibility at the polls. Today, we continue to support election officials and voters with disabilities through many EAC initiatives, including research and resource development, our efforts to modernize the voluntary voting system guidelines, and facilitating discussions on important accessibility topics like accessibility workshops the EAC will be hosting next month on February 20th. Again, the EAC will be hosting because it looks like you folks are falling asleep for me. So the EAC will be hosting a disability workshop on February 20th. This is going to be interactive, folks. So we at the EAC also have a long history of supporting language accessibility in elections. On our website, you will find glossaries and phrase books, and election terminology in Spanish and 8 Asian languages, translation of the National Voter Registration application form in 14 languages, recordings of sessions from our 3 recent language summits, and other resources. Examples of such additional resources in this field are Disability Rights Pamphlet. See, interactive. So, and I keep a copy of our smaller one in my wallet, and those are available out in the lobby. We recently also published an issue brief on language accessibility in elections. With me today to discuss these issues and related topics is a distinguished panel of election officials and voting right accessibility specialists. From my right to my left, Michelle Bishop is a voting rights specialist for the National Disability Rights Network, where she coordinates voter access initiatives nationwide and work with voting rights policy. Barry Stephenson is the chairman of the board in Jefferson County, Alabama. He has more than 2 decades of experience in elections. Terrica Jennings is an attorney and ADA coordinator for the D.C. Board of Elections, where she leads efforts to serve voters with disabilities, senior citizens, and those with limited English proficiencies. Patty Hansen has served as the recorder of Coconino County, Arizona, since first being elected in 2012. She has worked in elections and voter registration for more than 3 decades. As each of our panelists today, our panelists will first share some of their initial thoughts and take questions from me, and if we have time, maybe one or two from the audience. Again, interactive. So with that, Michelle, if you would like to start speaking.
Absolutely, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Michelle Bishop, and I am the Voting Rights Specialist at the National Disability Rights Network. I've spoken at many events like these over the last few years where I've shared some really important data from the U.S. Government Accountability Office about what voter access looks like in the United States. So I'm not going to do that again today. I recognize a lot of the faces in the audience, and you've heard those numbers. You've heard me recite those numbers ad nauseum over and over again. So what I'm going to do today, it's like New Year's resolution time, right? Still safely, because we're still in January. I know I'm a little late. I'm not a resolutions person. But I have my 3 resolutions for election 2020. They're essentially the 3 lies I want us to stop telling about voter access going into the 2020 elections, okay? Is everybody ready? You all look a little nervous. All right, interactive, that was good, we did it. You all look a little nervous. That's because you all know me. It's gonna be okay. All right, so the first lie we're gonna stop telling in 2020 is that everyone really cares about access for voters with disabilities because we've seen the numbers. Now, we've come a really long way. Those GAO numbers I referenced, in 2000, we were starting at 16% accessibility, architectural access to polling places. That's 16%, like less than 20. Now, in 2016, we'd push that number all the way up to 40%. That means we've made a lot of progress, mostly because some of you I see in the room and on the stage with me here today who've worked tremendously hard to make that happen. Thank you for those of you. Your perseverance and your creativity and your making your polling places accessible never ceases to amaze me. Please tell your friends and colleagues to do the same, because I happen to believe that if every single one of our elections personnel in the United States cared as much as I do about access to the vote, we'd be at much better than 40% right now, right? That's 16 years worth of work to have less than 50% of our polling places fully accessible. So let's talk about it. That's going to lead me nicely into lie number 2 that we're going to stop telling going into the 2020 elections. And that's that somehow making our polling places and our voting systems ADA compliant is difficult and costly. That it's somehow so burdensomely expensive that we either can't do it or we simply have to shut those polling places down. This is a lie that I can't do again in 2020. We're going to stop doing that, y'all. All right? What we're going to stop doing is contracting one private contractor to tell us exactly how expensive we can possibly make it to make all of our polling places accessible. This is like the equivalent of going to the car dealership when you need a minor repair on your car. And they're going to order you a brand new part from another country, and they're going to charge you their top labor rates, and they're going to make it phenomenally expensive. When you know for a fact there were 10 mechanics you passed on the way to the dealership who could get you a used part that works just as well, and they charge a lower labor rate. Or quite frankly, if you're my dad, you could have paid a couple bucks to get it out of a junkyard, the same part, right, and put it in yourself. Let's all be a little bit more like my dad in 2020. We're looking at top dollar cost estimates for, pouring cement to make permanent ramps and things like that the ADA in no way requires. So let's stop telling lies about the ADA and what it requires when low cost and temporary fixes are perfectly allowable. They make polling places accessible and they keep them open, right? So let's use that car dealership model and let's start thinking about how we can bring our polling places into compliance in a way that really respects the work that we're doing and respects people with disabilities. And the third and the final lie that I want us to stop telling going into the 2020 elections is that we can somehow meet the demands, all the demands, of every election security alarmist. Now, not election security expert, not election security advocate, but election security alarmist, there is a difference, while preserving access to the vote for everyone. Because those GAO numbers that we're looking at tell the story of polling places that are very, and I emphasize very, slowly becoming more accessible, while also telling the story of voting systems, voting stations, ballots themselves that are becoming less accessible. In 2008, 54% of them were considered accessible to people with disabilities. In 2016, that number actually goes down to 35%. 35% of voting stations themselves were fully accessible to people with disabilities in 2016. Why? Because we're moving very rapidly back towards paper-based systems without fully thinking through what that means in terms of access for all voters. Let's not pretend that we have a lot of systems in place right now that secure our elections while also respecting the privacy and the independence of voters with disabilities. We have to start coming up with better solutions. This is not to say that election security is not important. Of course it's important. Election security is how we make sure that our elections are accurate and fair and represent the will of the voters. But you know how else we make sure our elections are accurate and fair and represent the will of the voters? By letting them vote. By letting them vote a ballot that is private and independent so that they can secure their own ballots, or at least have a fighting chance at verifying and securing their own ballots. So those are my 3 lies, my New Year's resolution that I'm hoping we will leave back in 2019. And in 2020, we'll move forward making sure our polling places are fully accessible in ways that are, quite frankly, cost-effective and quite achievable. We're keeping those polling places open, and we're making our ballots both accessible and secure. Because if we want to have a real democracy, we have to be able to do both. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Barry?
I love Michelle because she uses y'all. And Mr. Secretary from Louisiana is a University of Alabama graduate. Congratulations last night, keeping in the SEC West. But thank you for the invitation. Thank you for all that the EAC does. Again, mention I'm Barry Stephenson from Jefferson County, Alabama. I'll tell you a little about Jefferson County. It's the most populous county in the state of Alabama. It contains the largest city in the state, the city of Birmingham. Not only do we have a large urban center, we have several large suburban areas, and also a large swath of rural area in small towns. You can drive 20, 25 miles outside from the city center, and you'll find farms, cattle ranches. So we have a broad spectrum that represents the urban, the suburban, and the rural and small town voting. That all comes together. My office is responsible for all the voter registration. We prepare all the voting materials that go to the polls. I'm responsible for the precinct selection, and also responsible for the training of all the poll workers and all the voting aspects, A to Z, as we prepare for our elections. We're early in the process. Presidential preference primary for Alabama is March 3rd. So we've been busy in 2019 preparing for that, and continue to do that. As soon as I get back, we have a huge meeting on Thursday preparing for that. But we do take accessibility very seriously. It's very important to us in Jefferson County, and we've implemented several measures that have helped in our county. One, in the last few election cycles, we have greatly increased the number of poll workers. Now, poll workers has been mentioned repeatedly this morning, and the average age of our poll workers would skew to the AARP category, and that's not uncommon across the country. But we've greatly increased the number of poll workers in the last few election cycles. We have poll workers in the parking lot. So if they see someone that may need assistance, they could be on a cane, on a walker, or just having some difficulty, they can assist them. We have poll workers at the doors, so they can help them there. All our doors, they're supposed to be compliant, but still, we want people there at the doors, not only to greet them, but to help anyone that may need that assistance. We have extra poll workers inside the facility in the room that voting is actually taking place. If they see someone that is having a little difficulty or has a disability, we'll take them to the front of the line. And they're pretty courteous in Alabama, and they understand that. So they don't mind people being taken to the front of the line. So we've greatly increased the number of poll workers. And we very rarely get compliments. People are quick to complain, but we have actually received compliments about just taking that measure alone, increasing the poll workers, because it does help people from the parking lot all the way through the voting process. Another thing we've done in the 2018 election cycle, we went to e-poll books. E-poll books helps not only those with maybe a disability issue, but it helps all voters. It has greatly reduced the time in line. So we've seen that reduction, so that's helping all the voters. And then in 2020, we're very glad to be moving toward this improvement. We have purchased new voter disability assistance equipment. We're replacing our old equipment that's several years old. We're bringing in the new technology. It's smaller, it's more user-friendly, and it's the latest technology. We've had some demonstrations run at our courthouse, and the feedback has been 100% positive. So we're very excited as we roll into the 2020 election cycle, implementing that new equipment and that new technology. But again, thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here today.
Great. Thank you, Barry. Next up, Terrica.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Terrica Jennings, and I'm an attorney with the DC Board of Elections. Any local DC folks here? Oh, hi. I have poll worker applications for everyone. I saw you. At the board, my job is to ensure that people with disabilities, senior citizens, and limited English proficient voters are able to access the voting process just like everyone else, so equally and independently. We do have a hard time, for example, getting people to come out to be poll workers, and I guess, like he said, it's that AARP crowd, and we do want everyone to participate. So that's one of the things that we're focused on this year. I just want to go about talking about some of the things that we're doing at the board. One of the things that we focus on is ensuring that our poll workers are vastly prepared to assist people with disabilities and our LEP folks. So we spend a bunch of time training. Not only do they have to do their mandatory 4-hour training, I spend a significant amount of time with our trainers crafting training material for them to know how to interact with people with disabilities, disability etiquette in terms of how we speak to folks, people first language. We also spend a bunch of time with polling place accessibility. And as Michelle mentioned, across the country is about 40% accessibility, right? In DC, and no lie, because we have independent organizations who assess our polling places, we're at about 98% accessibility right now. And so we pride ourselves on working with other local groups such as, government organizations like the Department of General Services, as well as DDOT, which is Department of Transportation, to make our sites accessible on election day. So things like portable ramps, if you can't afford to put in or cannot put in permanent ramps, having our ADA compliance team on staff, and just doing things that we may not have throughout the year, but that we can use on election day to make our sites accessible. One of the big things that the board does that I think also makes us successful in this arena is that we have an ADA compliance team. So outside of our poll worker team, we have a group of folks that are only concerned with making our sites accessible. So their only job, and if you're local, you may see them running around on election day, is to keep our sites accessible, moving chairs, keeping doors open, assisting folks from the parking lot. In DC, every single polling site on election day, we have curbside voting. So if you don't want to, or if you cannot come into our polling site on election day, you can vote from the comfort of your car if you have a disability or if you are a senior citizen over 65. We also have no excuse absentee voting. So if you just want to vote from home in your pajamas or because of your disability or age you choose not to come out, you don't have to give us a big reason. Your dog died, you have to go to work, etc. You can just vote from the comfort of your home. I've personally driven to people's homes to deliver their ballots because we want to ensure that everyone has access to the voting process. It's a pretty crucial deal to us. A lot of things that we do here also focuses on our people with disability, not just people with disabilities, but our limited English proficient voters. So we have, interpreters or translators at each polling site in DC where we have a large majority of folks. We also have at every single polling site translated voting material, as well as interpreters available by phone. And one of the things that we're going to be focusing on for 2020 is having folks that are not just interpreters, but also poll workers, so we have more people in our polling places that can assist us. We also pride ourselves on having materials that are also accessible in DC, translated. In DC, we're required to have 6 languages, or assist folks within 6 languages. And we have our brochures, our voting applications, and other materials translated for our DC demographic, as well as we provide assistance to folks in all other languages if it's requested from us. So again, it's a big deal to us here in DC to ensure that everyone has access to the polls. We're looking for folks to come out to assist us on election day, so sign up to be poll workers or sign up to be a part of our ADA compliance team. And our goal, again, is just to ensure that everyone has access to the polls, and no lies for 2020. So that's where we are right now.
Great, thank you. Patty?
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the EAC for inviting me here today. I'm from Coconino County, Arizona, and I just want to start by showing you a little bit of what Coconino County is like. It's a little different than Okay, so I'm having trouble, of course. It helps to turn it on. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Coconino County is the second largest county geographically in the U.S., and we are larger than 9 states. We have a portion of the Navajo Nation, which goes into the state of Utah and also into New Mexico. And the portion of the Navajo Nation that we have is larger than the state of Connecticut. Okay, we also are home to 4 Native American tribes. As I mentioned, the Navajo Nation. We have a village of the Hopi tribe, and we also have a village of the HAVA people, which is located at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And we have a band of the San Juan Paiute tribe. Just to give you an example of what it looks like, this is one of our polling places, the Coppermine Chapter House, which is a community center on the Navajo Nation. And you may notice we don't have a lot of options for locations to put a polling place. There's just nothing else around. Let me see. This is what the village looks like in Moenkopi. It is on the Hopi Reservation. And then finally, this is Supai Village at the bottom of the Grand Canyon for the HAVA tribe. You may notice for HAVA there are no roads. So the only way to get to HAVA is to take a 9-mile hike, ride a horse, a donkey, or there is a helicopter that goes down on Thursdays and Sundays. So we have a few challenges when it comes to accessibility with voters in Coconino County. In 2016, the Department of Justice came out and did an evaluation of some of our polling places, including several on the reservations. And unfortunately, they found us lacking in almost all of the locations. Our biggest problem was the lack of paid parking. And you may have noticed we don't even have paved roads, let alone paved parking. And so what we have been able to do is Michelle's organization, the National Disability Rights Network, came out this summer, and we've also worked with the Arizona Center for Disability Law, and it was suggested that we look at an process which is soil stabilizing, which you can spray on a biodegradable product that will make the surface firm for about 2 inches down. And so we're looking at that to create our accessible parking locations. We're also under the Voting Rights Act for the Navajo language. And the Navajo language is not a written language, it's an oral language, and it's very descriptive. So we have 2 Native American outreach workers that work for us full time. And in fact, Alta Edison is here today. She's our coordinator of this program. She's been with the office for 30 years. And she worked with the 3 counties in Arizona, plus the counties in Utah and then New Mexico and the Navajo Election Administration. And they've created an election glossary so that the terminology for elections is uniform across the 3 states and the 3 counties. She also provides a booklet and does the training for our Navajo interpreters at the polling places, and works closely with the Hopi tribe to also provide language assistance. So that just kind of gives you an overview of what it's like a little bit of administering elections in a rural area. I should say we have 87,000 registered voters. So we're big and mighty geographically, but we're kind of small with numbers. But it's a beautiful place. I invite you to come anytime.
you, Patty. So both Patty and Mary, you both mentioned having to deal with DOJ in terms of monitoring and enforcement actions within your jurisdictions. What sort of advice would you give election officials on how they can avoid any sort of lawsuits with DOJ?
Well, the first rule would be document, document, document. A quick story, we had the Department of Justice show up at our courthouse. They only had to walk across the street. The federal courthouse is across the street. And in the summer of 2016, and unbeknownst to us, several assistant U.S. attorneys had gone out and looked at dozens and dozens and dozens of our polling precincts. And they had come back with a list of items that needed to be addressed. Now, when I came into the office in 2008, I did a complete survey of every single precinct, and we had all that documented. And as complaints arose over the years, either a facility didn't meet standards or our facility needed to be split, we would go out and complete a new survey, take new pictures, and we would address a complaint or we would address an issue such as a precinct needing to be split. So we had all that documented, but what the DOJ presented to us, some of it was easily fixable. Like I said, we had been operating on the complaint system. Perhaps a parking lot had been paved and they had not restriped it properly. That's easily fixable. Perhaps a renovation had taken place at a facility and they had not placed the handicap signs properly. The biggest thing they had at about 25 of our precincts was that there was no van accessible sign. They had the parking striped, they had the parking signs. I get a purchase order, I go to Granger.com, I order 50 van accessible signs, I go out, I tack them all on. So it was real easy to get a lot of their checklists done. But there were some that had developed problems. So we agreed to do a complete resurvey of all our precincts. It was 175 at the time. We completed the survey. I took pictures of everything. I got a digital level. So when we looked at the curb cut or we looked at the ramp, I took a picture. It was under 5%. I sent it to them on this date. I know it was in compliance, and that's all placed in a file. And they were easy to work with because we were proactive. We tried to address everything as quick as possible. They did give us some time into 2017 to complete that. And then we agreed to a program that if there was any change or a precinct needed to be split, that through the 2020 cycle, so we go all the way through this calendar year, we would send them the survey, send them the pictures, so they could have a record of that also. So it wasn't, it's never good when the DOJ just shows up, you think, but it wasn't adversarial because we had documentation and we promised to continue extra documentation. So the program for us has been a good thing because we have accessibility and we have it documented, and going forward we're going to have it documented. So that's our story in Jefferson County.
Great, Patty.
Okay, I guess the advice I would give, the first thing is don't freak out. Excuse me, it is intimidating to have the Department of Justice come and they kind of threaten you with a lawsuit if you're not going to comply. But it's an opportunity to really look at how you can improve on what you're currently doing. We too have done our accessibility surveys for many, many years. We thought we were doing a good job, but having a different set of eyes coming in really helped us. And you can collaborate with the organizations such as Michelle's and with our Arizona Center for Disability Law. And also, you have to start thinking outside the box. And the people that, your voters will be able to help you too, say what, they live there, they know what is needed. And so I think you can really take it as an opportunity to improve on what you're doing and not be intimidated. Also share with each other. We have to do our post-election surveys on election day and send them to the Department of Justice. And we would be happy to share those surveys with any other counties and that, so you can gauge on what you're doing and whether there are other areas where you can help. So.
Following up on what you mentioned a little earlier, you had said that the road was, you could spray something on it and it would be solid for 2 inches down. Is that permanent?
Yes.
It is?
It's a dust abatement kind of process. And it was actually suggested by an attorney with the Arizona Center for Disability Law.
Great.
And we're trying it in 2020. I'm hoping it's going to work. It says that it will last up to 6 months. And the good news about that is this would benefit the people that live in our county in between elections. We need to look at things that are going to help day to day. On the Navajo Nation, there's a much higher percentage of people with mobility issues than there is off the reservation. So it just makes sense that us from the counties need to look at ways to help our citizens in between election time.
Great.
Can I add to that quickly?
Please do.
Arizona Center for Disability Law, who are amazing, are actually part of NDRN's national network. We're a membership association. Our network is federally mandated. So we exist in every state, district, and territory in the US, and we're actually mandated by HAVA to work on access to the vote. So it's not just Arizona Center for Disability Law. Wherever you are, one of our affiliate organizations exists, and they want to work with you on these issues.
Great. Some of you, and this is a great transition, some of you mentioned working with non-governmental organizations in your jurisdictions to support efforts to better serve voters with accessibility needs. Michelle, you represent the NDRN. What advice would you have for election officials who are looking to improve public engagement efforts on those issues?
Open your doors and let those organizations come in and work with you. I know sometimes that's a scary thing for elections officials. Elections officials are going to come up in the media if things go wrong on election day. They're going to get those threats of a lawsuit that have already come up. So I know it's a scary thing, but being collaborative in that process, I think, is where you want to end up. No matter how things happen on election day, if I, as an elections official, had a choice of taking all that heat by myself and saying, I made all these decisions on my own and did the best I could, and this is where we landed, that's not the position I want to be in. I would much rather get up on election night or the day after election day and say, here are all the stakeholders who worked on this together, and this is where we landed, and we're going to keep trying to do better and better going forward. Here are my cybersecurity experts that we work with. Here's our disability access experts that we work with. Here's our language access folks that we work with. We're all trying to do this together, and this is where we're at. And I would much rather, in terms of disability access, have those disability rights organizations and people with disabilities next to me saying, really, we're trying very hard. This is how difficult it is to make all of our polling places 100% accessible, all of those things, rather than having to say on my own, I tried my best and I'm not an expert in the ADA and here we are. So I think you end up in a much better position. It's also going to just generate better solutions. That's a great suggestion that came from Arizona Center for Disability Law, that how many folks would have known about that just on their own if they were out somewhere trying to solve this problem independently. So it's going to generate better solutions. It's going to push the ball further down the field. And for all those things that we can't fully achieve by November 2020, because we still have a long way to go, then we have those partners standing with us and saying we're all working on this together.
Commissioner Hicks, may I add to that?
Please do.
So here at the DC Board of Elections, we have our annual Voter Access Forum where we invite stakeholders from all the disability rights organizations in DC, as well as our language access stakeholders, to come into the board, and we have pretty much like a roundtable discussion with everyone who shows up about what we can do to improve our services, get feedback, get suggestions. Every time we think about relocating a polling site or changing a polling site, we invite members of the public to weigh in for 30 days before we actually pick that site. And even last year when we had our last voter access forum, which is in October, and we'll have another one before the next election, we asked folks to come in and give us suggestions about sites, as well as come out with us when we do our surveys. Because sometimes you have folks from the disability rights organizations that they're like, don't pick that site, we don't like that site, why would you pick that site? And it's what you mentioned, sometimes there's no other options. And so when they come out with us into the field and they see in a particular precinct we have nothing else to pick, then they kind of understand why we have to pick a site and then make it accessible using temporary measures. So for us, we found it very beneficial to work with the different organizations, and we continue to invite folks to come out to work with us and to give us feedback, and it's more of a collaborative thing because the goal is to ensure that everyone votes. It's not combative. We don't want to be us against them, you know, and so it has worked for us where we get lots of good feedback and people can understand why we made the decisions that we do. So the partnership works.
Go ahead,
If
Pat.
I could add something. When we saw that we were failing in so many different areas, the one thing we made clear is, and made this strong decision of, we are not going to close any polling places. We are not going to make it more difficult for our voters, especially on out in our rural area, to be able to vote. So that really pushed us to come up with alternative solutions to make it accessible. So that's one thing I think is important. You have to, like I said, think outside the box, and how can you keep this location and make it accessible?
Right, right. Sticking with our last two speakers, the next round of the Voting Rights Act, Section 203 determinations are right around the corner for 2021. This process will tell us what states and localities will be required to provide for language accessibility folks. So, Terrica, what advice would you have for election officials who are considering adopting voluntary language assistance? And then, Patty, what advice would you have for election officials who soon may be covered? So, Terrica, if you want to start.
With me.
Yep.
Again, the big advice I think is the first thing we spoke about just now, which is to interact with stakeholders from the language access community, advocates, have them come in and tell us what we can do to really engage members of the language access community, because we can have all these practices in place, we can have all these services in place, but if members of the community don't know that we have them, then it really isn't beneficial. So first of all, just getting that information out there and having those stakeholders come in to tell us how we can really make these programs beneficial for the community. Also, having folks that are part of these different communities actively work with us. And so for us, we have a bunch of folks that come out and they sign up to be poll workers. One of the things that we have tried to do is have our poll workers also be people of the different communities, and so the language access community. That way, when they're at the polling site, they're not just helping folks to, sign in, register to vote, or not registered to vote, but just to be a part of the voting process. They can also communicate in that person's language so they feel more at ease in getting that process done. So it's a two-part thing. One, engaging the community when you decide to do those optional things or rather improve your service, and also having folks that are part of those communities really be a part of your program. And the big thing with that is when you have folks that look like you and sound like you want to engage more. So, and that goes for not just for language access, when you have folks in your polling site that speak your language and make you feel more at ease. When you have people in your polling sites that look like you, when you are a person who uses a wheelchair, a person who's blind, a person who's deaf, and you have folks in your polling place that look like you and have the same disabilities as you, you feel more at ease and you feel more welcomed in that process. So those are the things that we do, for us to make us just more inclusive.
That's one of the things the EAC has been advocating for, whether or not that's our men and women who are overseas who are coming back who have a sense of duty to our nation to serve as poll workers, or those who have disabilities to have like-minded people doing that, or folks who have different language skills as well. So this is where I would advocate for folks to serve as poll workers again. As a recent member of ARP, I think that would be great. That's a joke, folks. It's like, which I am now a member of ARP. I think that's, even though it's looked at as the age is so high that we need to bring that down, but I think that the EAC and others are doing a great job of looking towards schools and other aspects as well. Secretary DeRose talked about that a little bit earlier as well. But I don't want to take too much more. So Patty, if you want to talk about the issue as well in terms
Well, I
of...
just would like to echo what you said. It is very important to hire people and have people involved from the communities and that know. I'm very pleased that our county has been able to have 2 full-time Native American outreach workers. And also that we have somebody like Alta that grew up there and knows the culture and people. And you do have to build that trust, especially with Native American, I would say, voters. And so, yeah, I think the collaboration, also our poll workers, we hire local people to be our poll workers, and they do the interpretation. And so that's also important, I think. So, yeah, just reflect what your community is. That's what you want.
Great. So before we open it up for audience participation, so this is the chance for you to think of your questions that you want to ask. We know from EVE's data, which is the Election Administrating Voting Survey that we have out on the counter there from the EAC and other sources for vote by mail, we know that vote by mail is becoming increasingly popular across the country. Michelle, what sense do you have that this is impacting disability or disabled voters? And then I want the rest of you to answer as well as possible.
That's an excellent question. I think in general, we like to see a menu of options for all voters, particularly when it comes to voters with disabilities, because access is a very complicated issue. Every type of disability has different barriers, different access needs, and every person who even has the same type of disability doesn't experience it the same way. So the more we're able to provide various options for marking, verifying, and casting your ballot, the better I think we're going to be able to accommodate all those access needs and really make the system work for everyone. So in general, I think we're really interested in mail voting and in the increase in that. I think the thing that I always caution is that we talk a lot about access to the vote in very traditional terms of your local polling place. And so sometimes there's this thought that if we switch to mail voting and we eliminate the need for polling places, then we don't have any more access problems. And I want to caution that's very much not the case. If we, in the traditional sense, mail everyone a piece of paper that is their ballot and expect them all to be able to read it and mark it and fold it and put it in an envelope and send it back, people with disabilities who can't do that at their polling place can't do that from their kitchen table either. Right? A blind person can't magically read that ballot just because they're at home. So we still have to think about how we're going to make our vote by mail fully accessible. Our polling place voting should be fully accessible to everyone, but so should our vote by mail. So should any of our other methods of accessing your ballot. So I like some of the things that we're seeing. I like electronic delivery of blank ballots that allows someone to receive that ballot electronically, and then if I need to fill it out on my computer or my tablet or however makes it accessible to me, I'm able to do that. I think that those systems also, they're not internet voting, so they at some point require being able to print out and return that piece of paper. So they're not a full solution, they're not completely accessible. We've got to figure out what we're going to do about that. Mobile phone voting is on the rise. That actually eliminates the paper completely. As controversial as it is significantly more accessible. But even either of those options rely on the voters themselves having the tech that they need. Do I have a mobile phone, a tablet, a computer? And having access to reliable cellular data or internet service, which not everyone has. I bet you Patty's got a bunch of folks in her jurisdiction who don't have reliable internet access. So they're not full solutions. We haven't completely solved those problems yet. I would want to keep seeing innovation in that direction. And the one last thing I'll say about that, because I realize I've been talking for a minute, is that I don't think mail voting is ever going to completely replace the need for some form of in-person voting. It's very difficult to make sure that that vote by mail ballot is going to be fully accessible to everyone. There's going to need to be some type of vote center model for people for whom in-person voting is just going to be more accessible, or other options for returning your ballot in person if you're not able to put that ballot in the mail. So I don't know if we'll ever get completely away from having some version of in-person voting, and it's really critical that we make sure that all of those options that we're opening up for our voters have equal access for every type of voter.
Barry, did you want to add?
Well, I would echo on that point and just say the word federalism, because all states are not monolithic. So you have states that, Oregon, Colorado, all by mail. Alabama, the legislature says, we really like voting on election day, that day. And we're not in my office is not in the policy making arena, we're in the policy following arena. So we did in the last cycle go to no excuse absentee. We did see a spike up in those that voted absentee, and that also includes those with any disability issues. One thing you can never control on election day, and that's the weather. And November in Alabama, it could be 70, it could be 30, it could be thunderstorm, it could be rain, it could be sunny. So as I'm talking to groups leading up to the election, I encourage those, if you have a concern even about getting out on election day because of a weather-related issue, you may love your polling place, you may love seeing people, but you may be worried about the weather and how you can navigate a parking lot or whatever. If it is inclement weather, go ahead and vote absentee. So there's things that come into play, but we have seen an increase in absentee voting since we went to no excuse. I expect other reforms to come from our legislature, but I don't expect it to come quickly from our particular legislature.
Okay. Terrica, did you want to?
So in 2018, there was about 49.3%. The number for people with disabilities who voted was 49.3%, which is about 14.3 million people. That was a significant number, and that was a significant increase from prior years. And it is projected that that number will continue to rise in 2020 and in additional elections as we proceed, which means that we have to have a very inclusive process. We have to have a very dynamic process. And I know at the Board of Elections, our executive director and our general counsel, they are always cognizant of that. So we're continuously thinking about doing things like that, which is to have vote by mail, but having alternative processes where people with disabilities are equally a part of the process. And one of the things that we're currently looking at is like an audio-enabled balloting process. And just having vote centers, you still can't get rid of those because there are people who still have to come in because they can't read or the person's blind, et cetera. But while we embrace those changes, we're constantly thinking about how that will impact our senior citizens, people with disabilities, or LEP folks. So we're open to everything, but at the forefront of that is how we can be appealing to everyone that's a part of the voting process.
There's always a challenge when you have a large number of people that don't read and write. So voting by mail is very difficult. But I'm a firm believer and supporter of ballot by mail in that it delivers the ballot to you. And I agree that we would have to have voting assistance sites on election day. And we've conducted 3 elections now, I believe it is, a portion of the Navajo Nation. And we had voter assistance sites open from the normal hours that a polling place would be open. Also, we're so large geographically, to get to our office from parts of our county may be a 3.5-hour drive. So the other areas, even off the reservation, you're going to need voter assistance sites. So it's, I think, something that's coming. Arizonans overall have embraced it. Our neighboring county, Yavapai County, has 87% of their voters in 2018 cast their ballot by mail. Our county, it's a little bit lower because of having so many Native American voters. Native Americans really had to struggle to even get the right to vote. And so on election day, it is a huge celebration in the community. And it's really very exciting that people want to come out and they want to vote with each other. So I think the combination of voting by mail for people who want the convenience, along with voter assistance sites, does a very good job at meeting all of our voters' needs.
Great, great. I think we have time for 1, maybe 2 questions. So again, the EAC folks are walking around, so.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Beth Tudon with the League of Women Voters in Fairfax County, Virginia. And a couple of years ago, there was a testimony, I would say, in the Washington Post about a sister who had a brother who had a disability. And in it, she said they always watched the news together, they always talked about things. And at one point, he said, "You know, I wish I could vote." And she looked at him and she realized he wasn't registered, they'd never talked about it. And we run a high school voter registration program. So it's easy for us to get into the AP classes, the IB classes, but we have to ask to go to the special education, the self-contained classes. And so I just wanted to ask you, so in order to be a voter, you need to register. So what do you do, what do you recommend to reach out to people so that those who are in the disability community can get actually registered so they can then vote?
That's a great question. I suppose I had not heard from many colleagues at League of Women Voters before that there's some extra hoops to jump through to get to some of those.
Not everyone realizes, even thinks about this person could register, that's what I mean.
Yes, accurate. And what you're tapping into, honestly, is centuries worth of some stigma against people with disabilities that I definitely wish I could solve for you right now. And just completely work myself out of a job. But I think it starts with the type of work that you're doing through League of Women Voters that a lot of other organizations are doing as well. We have to be doing that outreach. We have to be doing that education. We talk to a lot of voters who have disabilities who say, I want to vote and I can't vote because I have a legal guardian. And we, first of all, work with those folks. So if you come across anyone who has that issue, get in touch with our affiliate in your state, and they will help that person advocate to get their right to vote back. But interestingly enough, what we see in a lot of cases is we say, well, let's look at this paperwork, because how guardianship interacts with your voting rights is different in every state. And sometimes there is no paperwork, because that person doesn't have a legal guardian. They have a parent who calls themselves the guardian. They never had guardianship established, which means legally you're your own guardian. You could have been voting this whole time. And we have a registration form right now. Let's fix that. But in some cases, many cases, someone who believes they've lost the right to vote hasn't, or just no one's ever approached them and talk to them about voting, as politically informed and as active as that person may be. So I think it starts with having those conversations. Let's get into all of those classrooms. Let's find people where I love getting people before they leave high school, right? Because we lose a lot of folks. We do a lot of campus work, but not everyone goes to a college campus after they leave high school. I love getting folks in high school and getting them engaged and getting them registered, pre-registered, whatever the options may be in your state. But we also do a lot of campus organizing. For folks who go to a traditional college campus. One, there are student disability services offices on those campuses who we could be engaging in those efforts. But two, let's catch people the other places they're going. Let's find them at work. Let's find people with disabilities who are just going to like sheltered workshops or day programs who aren't fully integrated into the community. Let's find them where they're at. And let's be the first people to ask them if they want to register and if they've ever thought about voting. I think it's really as inconvenient as this answer may be, probably going to take a pretty strong ground game on our part to start to turn that tide. But thank you for the work you're clearly doing on that.
And one of the things, can I
Go
answer
ahead,
you real
go
quick? One of the things that my agency does is we have we have a voter outreach team, and so they go into different organizations, different events to register folks. We have one person that is dedicated to students. And so we catch our students early. We go into different high schools, and those that can be registered are registered, and those that can't at that time, they get the education. And they also get to work with us on election day to get them thinking about the process. And it doesn't matter if you have a disability or not. But as far as people with disabilities are concerned, our outreach team goes into nursing home facilities. We partner with the National Federation of the Blind, the local one, as well as the main office, and different organizations here that deal with people with disabilities, and we register folks to vote. And a big part of it is education, letting folks know that unless you are considered by the courts to not, not have the capacity to vote, you can participate in the process. And so having that conversation. And unless a court deems you incompetent, you can register to vote and you can vote. And having folks that on site to help them to register to vote. So our staff actually goes out and helps them to fill out the form, as well as on election day, we have folks that are inside our precincts or voter assistant clerks that are trained specifically to assist people with disabilities. So it's a two-part thing. But having folks literally go into the schools, going to the nursing home facilities, and different organizations, I think is key. So as Michelle said, it's about the ground game. You have to have that commitment.
And we love to partner with organizations like yours and bring what we know about the disability community to the work that you're doing, because it's important to know those types of laws. Not every state has those laws. So we love to partner with organizations like yours and make sure the folks that you have doing this work on the ground are really well versed in what laws exist where they are and what they may be and how to work with those. So that's something we can offer as well to elections officials, but also to those folks who are out there just doing that voter engagement work.
That is a great segue to what's happening on February 20th. We are the EAC will be hosting a workshop for folks with disabilities. And I hope that all you folks who are looking down at your phones are actually entering that date in there right now. So with that, I want you to join with me in thanking our panelists